So again, welcome. We are so glad you are here for celebration of Reunification Month. And this presentation is going to be around concurrent planning for permanency. And I'm very excited to introduce M. Parente, who is one of our assistant directors over the permanency programs, as well as policy and practice. She has an awesome presentation to share with you, but mostly this is going to be a very interactive webinar to kind of go through and demonstrate how concurrent planning could work at your agency. So without any ado, M.
Thanks, Brenda. You made it easy for me. I don't even have to introduce myself. I do want to, however, emphasize the piece about we hope that this will be something that everyone participates in. I am an extrovert. If you haven't met me, if you've met me, you already know that. And normally I give this presentation in person. We wanted to do it virtually so that people could participate from all across the state easily, and we could record it. But it's weird to me to be delivering it from my desk at home and not seeing all of your faces and being able to see your reactions to the content. So I'd like to ask folks to please use the chat and also to use reactions. There's all kinds of features in Zoom for you to be able to show what you're thinking or feeling as we cover different content. I'd like to really encourage people to take advantage of that because it will help me to know how you're receiving the content that I'm delivering. I am going to start by talking about what we hope happens when kids come into foster care. This should not be new information to you. All of us came into this field because we really wanted to make a difference in the lives of kids and families. And so what we hope happens when kids have to come into foster care is that the result of that intervention is that children are safer, families are stronger, children get raised in families which meet their needs. Children are raised by parents or caregivers who are unconditionally committed to them. They become their forever families, whether that's their parents through reunification or an alternative caregiver. We want children to never need to come into foster care again. And we want them to grow up and to be healthy, happy, productive adults and eventually become good parents themselves. We hope that if there has to be foster care as an intervention, the result is that we end a often intergenerational cycle where trauma and the impacts of societal problems affect the way that parents are able to meet the needs of their kids. And we want kids to come out of foster care and be better equipped than their parents were to meet the needs of their children. Unfortunately, we all know that this doesn't always happen. When things don't go well in foster care, instead, what we see is that children who are all traumatized by the experience of coming into foster care can also be traumatized by being in foster care. The experience of having multiple placements in foster care results in multiple traumatic experiences. The re-entry into foster care from another family or failed adoption has a tremendous traumatic impact on children. Families lose their children to foster care and children lose their families. Children can be raised by the system where they languish in foster care without permanency in the worst case scenarios, eventually aging out of the system without connection to either their family of origin or another permanent family. This has become particularly important to me as we continue to work towards trying to reduce the number or the rate of kids who are aging out of foster care in Virginia without permanency, but also because these are the kids represented in this slide are the kids who end up on our Safe and Sound Task Force list.
Recording in progress.
Who've been in care the longest and typically have TPR, but don't have an identified adoptive family and no longer have any connections with their family of origin. These are kids who've been in congregate care for as long as 4 years or longer. They've had as many as 18 to 25 placements in the time they've been in foster care, and no one is visiting them besides their worker, like the worker who unfortunately might change every year. That's no one calls them, no one recognizes their birthday, no one visits them or reaches out to them in these placements. So increasingly, these negative outcomes have become something that I'm really tuned into and wanting to make sure that we do everything we possibly can do at the beginning of a foster care case to make sure that we don't get to this place. And I know that all of you do too. That goes without saying. We're all in this work because we want good outcomes. So what I want to talk about today is how to connect concurrent planning to the casework so that we get the kinds of outcomes that we prefer. Okay, so what is concurrent planning? I hope that this is not an unfamiliar concept. It's part of the basic way we do foster care in Virginia. But I want to just go over a couple of things so that we all are sort of sharing the same definition. Concurrent planning is a casework practice that involves identifying and working towards a child's primary permanency goal, which is usually reunification, while simultaneously identifying and working on a secondary goal, which is usually transfer of custody to a relative or adoption. Concurrent planning is a way of doing foster care casework that facilitates family engagement. It ensures that we meet the requirements, in quotes, the requirements of doing foster care on foster care cases, but it also streamlines communication and increases the quality of our relationships with children and families that we're working with because transparency is emphasized. It also leads to better outcomes for children and families sooner, which is really our primary goal is for kids to not languish in foster care and that we get them connected to families who will be their permanent families as quickly as makes sense. So when kids come into care, what we're often thinking about is this kind of timeline, right? The child comes into care and then we want them to exit to permanency. Typically, we're thinking about reunification when kids come into care, right? Like the goal is to resolve the issues that brought the child into care so that they can exit to permanency. A straight shot, soon as possible. Like this is what would be ideal if every case looked like this quickly and safely. We got to permanency with relatives, with parents. But we know that not every case looks like this, right? Our reunification rate in Virginia hovers around 25 to 30%. I went out and looked for 2021, it was 27%. So for all the kids who exit foster care, 27% exited to reunification in 2021. And so their time in care might look like this. How long that line is depends, right? Most often when reunification is ruled out, then what happens is we come up with a plan B. If we haven't done any work on plan B in the first 12 months of the case, we get to the point that reunification gets ruled out, then we have to come up with plan B. We add another extended period of time at the end. If we have no plan B or we can't come up with plan B, then that period of time where it says exit to permanency might actually turn out to be that 4 years that kids languish in congregate care because we don't really have a permanency plan. We're not working towards anything during that period of time. We're just ensuring that the kid has a roof over their head, which is not the kind of outcome that really any of us want for the kids, right? When we do concurrent planning, the way that it's designed, the idea is that we start plan B as close to the beginning of the case as possible. So when we talk about permanency planning, we're really thinking about reunification as the primary goal, but we're looking at what the fallback plan might be, what the plan B might be for a child as soon as possible after that child enters care, so that we can have Plan B ready to go if we get to the point where reunification no longer looks like an option that can be achieved in a timely way. Doesn't mean reunification could never be achieved. It just means that given our timeframes, the constraints that we're working under, it's not going to be achieved timely. We want to look at what's the next best plan for that child. And we don't want to start from scratch after 12 months. We want to have that plan already in the works, so that when we're hitting the first permanency planning hearing, we're actually in a position where we could achieve Plan B at that hearing. So the shortened time frame ready to go at the point that we know we're not going to be able to accomplish reunification. All of which seems kind of funny, right? That we're talking about, given that this is reunification month. When we talk about concurrent planning, I think most often we're thinking about how to ensure that we get to permanency timely when reunification fails. I'm going to talk about that today because that's part of the concurrent planning model. But what I really want to emphasize over the course of the time we have together is that concurrent planning also helps us to be successful with reunification. Like if you remember, Plan A is typically reunification. Plan A, our first goal with foster care cases, is reunification. And what we want to emphasize today is that when we do concurrent planning well, it increases the support for the family and the likelihood that reunification will happen. Like we're not doing concurrent planning because we're moving on from reunification on the first day. We're doing concurrent planning so that we can both support parents to achieve reunification and have a fallback plan that the parents are actively involved in developing from day one in order to get to permanency for this child who's come into foster care in a way that reduces the overall amount of trauma that child is going to experience during the time that they're with us, and that we're going to have the best chance of getting to the kinds of outcomes that we really want for kids in foster care. So that said, these are the steps which are identified in our foster care guidance. I put the little citation there so you can find them if you want to. These are the 6 steps that support concurrent planning. We're going to go through all of these, but we're going to go through them all with a particular focus around reunification and supporting the parents in the process. So I want to start by giving you a case example. This is the case we're going to use for the little interactive activity that we're going to do later. But I want to start by just talking about a case, which really is an example of what happens when we don't do concurrent planning effectively. This is not a real case. It's sort of a conglomeration of case experiences that I had when I was in the local office when we didn't do things the way we should have, and also some cases that have been elevated to the state level, either through the ombudsman's office or constituent services because of a situation that has not gone well. And then we get to a point in the case where there's kind of a crisis. So I took these stories and I kind of put them together to make this case example. Now we're going to go through it together, and then I'm going to ask you how familiar does this seem, since I think unfortunately it's all too familiar. This is Chloe. Chloe's a newborn. When she came into care, she was a newborn. She entered foster care from the hospital after she was released from the NICU. She was born prematurely and substance exposed. Her mom has a substance use disorder, and during the time Chloe's been in foster care, her mom's continued to struggle with her substance use disorder. She has periods of sobriety, but then she relapses and she's had difficulty participating in services and being present in the case, and to Chloe. 12 months go by, during which, of course, Chloe, who's a newborn, bonds with her foster family, and her foster family falls in love with her. It's 12 months. There's not been progress made towards reunification. So the local department, of course, files for TPR, termination of parental rights, with a plan to proceed with adoption by the foster family. It's not a terrible plan. This happens all the time. Like, I need to see some reactions here from people in the audience. Like, this is common, right? That this kind of situation develops. However, at the point that the agency files for TPR, Chloe's father's brother and his wife, these are her uncle and aunt, come forward and petition the court for custody of Chloe. So what happens at this point? All right, I'm waiting. I'm not going to answer the question. This is interactive, people. You have to answer. What happens at the point that this family comes forward and petitions for custody?
All right, I see an answer in the chat, M, and FPM. The agency should pursue the possibility of the aunt and uncle to see if they're a viable option. You have to do a background check on the family. The court usually orders a home study. The uncle and aunt will be explored as an adopted family. Give them the kinship foster parent approval process letter within 15 days. And we hear, where has this family been? They always come forward last minute.
So what happens with our timeliness to permanency at this point? Listen to that list of things the agency has to do now. Is this kid going to get into permanency within 13 months? Any chance? 24 months? We have a 24-month goal for adoption. Any chance we're going to get to permanency within 24 months? How do we think the foster family is feeling?
We're seeing used, betrayed, devastated, scared and angry, sad, angry, hurt, confused, blindsided, and heartbroken because of their bond.
And what do we think the best outcome is for this kid at this point? Like, is there an outcome that's going to be good at this point for this kid? Unconditionally good, let's say.
So we have, they should always be ready for possible family coming forward. And then we have, no matter what happens, now there is loss. No, it's hard to everyone, no matter what. No, because there will be trauma for the child. Keep the foster family connected to the uncle and aunt who step in.
Yeah, there are things we're obliged to do at the point that this happens. And there are things we can do to mitigate the worst possible outcomes. But when relatives come forward at the last minute, it's going to be hard for everyone. Like, there's no getting around that, right? Like, if the child ultimately ends up moving, it's going to be hard on the child. It's going to be hard on the foster parents. If the child doesn't end up moving, then that child's going to grow up potentially disconnected from a family of origin that could potentially have been a resource to her, right? Like, we don't have enough information, because I didn't give you the information about what this family has to offer. But the point is that when they get identified at the end, the worker still has to do all the work. We don't reduce the workload. We do all the work, and we do it in a way that we don't get to the best results. Like, we still have to do all the work, but also deal with everybody's feelings about it. Like, how are the uncle and aunt likely to feel about the agency? Like, probably not inclined to have the best relationship at that point, right? Like, like all of the things that we have to do are made that much harder because we didn't do it at the front end of the case, right? Like at the point that now we have to do it, we also have to deal with everybody's feelings about where we are in the case and what needs to happen next. And we've eliminated any chance of doing what we need to do in a way that meets the federal timelines for timeliness, as well as potentially having significant impact on this kid's long-term well-being, right? Like the attachment and trauma issues around a potential move between the foster family and the relative is something that we have to consider. It can be done better or worse. I'm not saying like we shouldn't move the kid or like anything about that. But I'm just saying that part of the reason we do concurrent planning is this whole work smarter, not harder thing. When we wait till the end, we still have to do all the same stuff, but it's so much harder. And if we can do it at the beginning, we can eliminate the chances of having these kinds of struggles in doing the work. So if we could start over again, what would we do differently? This is really what we're going to talk about in terms of concurrent planning. We would do these things, right? We would determine paternity early and engage the paternal family. We would do an early permanency assessment with the parents. This is a focus on reunification. And we would do the early relative search and permanency assessment with the relatives. So we're going to talk about those things. In terms of permanency, one of the things that permanency, yes, permanency, but paternity is what I was really trying to say there. Very often we know the mom and the mom's family. Frequently, the agency has had interactions with mom's family as part of a CPS case or an in-home case. And then when the child comes into care, we may or may not have had as much contact with the father. In this case, the child was removed from the hospital. And, let's assume that the dad maybe was known to mom, but maybe not to the agency. So it might not have been possible to engage dad from the very beginning. But one of the things that we have to do in order to make sure that we include paternal family is we have to confirm paternity at the beginning and engage dad so that we can also engage the paternal family. That's one of the biggest front end work smarter strategies, right? We don't want to wait until the end to figure out who dad's family is. We want to make sure we get them to the table at the beginning. For a dad who was not the parent that the child was removed from, the road to reunification may actually be significantly easier, right? We have to consider mom and dad for reunification. Perhaps the child was not living with dad because either the father didn't know that he was the father, or the mother's family has been preventing dad from being involved. Like, we can't assume dad isn't involved because he's a bad parent. He doesn't care about his kid. We have to start by checking out who is dad and what does he have to offer. And when we think about reunification as sort of happening at the point that the issues that brought the child into care are resolved, if dad didn't know he was the father or he hadn't been allowed to be involved, like resolving the issues that resulted in the child coming into foster care for him might be really easy, might be very straightforward, right? Like, we have to assume that dad wants to parent, dad can be successful parenting. Like, that's where we need to start if the dad's not in the home that the child's removed from. What we see sometimes is that agencies, in efforts to ensure child safety, will put requirements in place for dad that aren't necessarily a match to to dad's circumstances relative to the child coming into care. So we want to make sure that we sort of treat dads who are not in the removal home differently than we treat parents who are in the removal home. So again, it's reunification month. We want to really focus on reunification can happen with moms or dads, right? Sometimes the issues for dads are different than the issues for the moms. And we want to make sure that we engage dad early and really consider what are the things that would have to be resolved for the child to go to dad as a option to exit foster care to reunification. Secondly, let me do this. We want to do this permanency assessment. We want to really look at what are the challenges the parents have to overcome in order to achieve reunification. We want to think about supports and services to provide, and then how to organize a team to wrap around the family in order for the family to be successful with reunification. I really want to emphasize here that parenting is hard, like for all of us. I think like one of the hardest times in my life personally was as a relatively young person. I was living very far away from all of my extended family when my partner and I had a baby. And it was freaking challenging. Like, we did not have a lot of financial resources. We had enough, but we didn't have any family support because we were away. We were living away. And I remember that time period really as being one of the more stressful time periods in my entire life, like trying to figure out this new role of being a parent, changed our relationship. We didn't have a babysitter. You know, we had childcare, but we didn't have somebody who could babysit at a moment's notice because we didn't have family in the area where we were living. And most of our friends didn't have children. So we didn't have like a ready-made community to support us. But we act like the families that we work with just need to step it up and do a better job. Like we, you know, when we are working with parents, I really want us to think about what are the challenges that they're dealing with. The child is not coming into foster care because the parent doesn't love the child. I have never, ever had a case where the parent didn't love the child. I've never seen a case where the parent didn't love the child. The parents love the child and they want to be successful, but there are barriers. There are things that are in the way. And being a parent is darn hard. And I'll tell you what doesn't make it easier. What doesn't make it easier is to have people judging you. What doesn't make it easier to parent is to have people treating you like you just need to get yourself together and then you could have your kid back. And if you can't get your kid back, it's your own fault, right? We have all the power. That the parent is at their most vulnerable. They've had the worst thing that could happen to a parent happen. They have no power or control in the situation. And we're handing them a list of things that they need to do. They've already experienced failure as a parent. Like we all, I mean, again, as a parent, I can remember distinctly feeling like I'm not good at my job. I'm not good at being a partner. I'm not good at being a parent. I can't freaking pay my bills. My house is a mess. Like as a parent, you've got all this stuff that you're trying to manage. And then you also have all these expectations now that somebody else is putting on you and that, you know, they're judging whether you're doing well or not doing well. Our clients also have experienced significant mistreatment in systems already. They've had failures in school. They've had failures with treatment providers. They've had failures with us where we've had a case where we've said we're going to help and then we remove instead of, from their perspective, helping. They have been unsuccessful in jobs. They've been unsuccessful in school. They've been unsuccessful in staying sober. They have experiences that make it harder for them to believe in themselves and to believe that what we have to offer is actually going to be helpful, which is why we have to do more of the work when families have a child come into foster care. We are responsible for meeting them more than halfway, because they come with all of these challenges and experiences, which make it hard for them to trust us enough to meet us halfway. Or when we expect them to meet us to do all the work, like how realistic is that really? We need to be meeting them more than halfway at the beginning to help them believe, trust, feel that we're there for them and that we want them to be successful. This is a huge part of this early permanency assessment, right? This is family engagement at its best. If we don't build trusting relationships with the families, with the parents, they're not going to tell us what they need. They're not going to tell us when they're struggling. They're not going to share with us the information that we need to develop a good service plan for the family, for the parent, for the child. And they're going to need more support than just the worker can offer, right? Like this family needs a whole team of people to wrap around them in order to give them the resources and supports that they're going to need to be successful. And so that's part of the work that we're obliged to do as the worker on the case, as the agency holding the case. We need to think about who that team is that's going to support this parent so that they have a chance to be successful. And how do we bring them to the table and get them wrapped around this family so that there's somebody there who can help whenever that family needs help. That's what's going to increase the likelihood of reunification for a family. So that brings us to the importance of early relative search and permanency assessment. So often when we talk about this, we're talking about relatives as the plan B, right? We want to bring relatives to the table. We want to identify them. We want to talk about what their needs are, so that we can be working that plan B goal at the same time. But also we want to make sure that they're available to support the reunification goal. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Okay, so I'm going to stop going through the steps right now, because what happens at this point in the presentation, what happens when I'm talking about all these things that we're obliged to do on the front end of a case when a kid comes into foster care, what starts happening is people start feeling like, wait, how is this smarter, not harder? This seems really hard, right? There's all this stuff. There's so many steps. There's so much work. So what I want to talk about here, I'm going to move to the next slide, is how concurrent planning provides a structure for doing this work that really is smarter, not harder. When we talk about concurrent planning, we talk about developing a team. So that's part of it. We talk about identifying a plan A and plan B. Plan B is people that we want to bring to the table. We talk about placement, like plan B, whenever possible, should be the child's current placement, so that the child doesn't have to move again in the future. But mostly we talk about frequent and transparent communication with an entire team of people. So when we're doing concurrent planning, using a meeting structure in which everybody on the team comes together regularly, there's a planned, some people use the word cadence, but there's a planned structure. The team, everyone on the team knows that every month we're going to have a meeting. So like, this is a made up document. I just stuck this stuff on here, but essentially we have a hearing because a kid came into court, and then the next month we have a child and family team meeting, and then we have another child and family team meeting. And then because we're getting ready to go back to court, we're going to have a family partnership meeting. We're going to have the more formal, structured, facilitated meeting in order to develop the service plan or the case plan for the next foster care court date. A child and family team meeting doesn't have to be facilitated. The supervisor doesn't have to be there. The worker, the treatment providers, and the parent and the caregivers are the members who make up that child and family team. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. But the idea is that if you're having these regular team meetings and everyone is there, one of the things that happens is all of the information about what's going on in the case gets shared with all of the people at the same time. So if you have a team that has 10 people on it, that's 10 phone calls that you don't have to make, because the work is happening in the room and all the people are there. Everybody's hearing the same thing at the same time. Really importantly, when questions come up about what information can we share with the extended family, how does the extended family know like what the family needs towards reunification or what their roles might be? If they're coming to these meetings, they're getting that information in the meeting. The parent is sharing it, they're asking questions. It's a conversation that's happening in the room, which reduces the work that has to be done through phone calls or separate meetings with different people. Everybody is there. It's all happening at the same time. The other thing that's so nice is that at the end of the meeting, you schedule the next meeting, then people can hold questions and concerns in between the meetings. So rather than, something happens, the worker might get 10 phone calls from all the people on the team about whatever it was that happened. If they know that there's a meeting next week, people can hold that. They may call and say, hey, this thing happened and we need to talk about it. And you can say, yes, we'll talk about it in the meeting next week. That'll be perfect. Then you can do the work that needs to happen in the team meeting instead of having to do it through a whole bunch of phone calls. And then when you don't include people or you can't connect with somebody, like you don't have to deal with people being upset or frustrated or aggravated because they don't have information that other people have, right? Like everybody gets all the same information at the same time. Okay, so what happens when we're doing this concurrent planning model really effectively is that we're doing case activity to address both Plan A and Plan B. The family and extended family are actively involved in decision-making. They're coming to the meetings and they're participating in the decision-making. They are telling you, worker, agency, what needs to happen to successfully achieve either reunification or another permanency option for this family. The relationships between the foster parents, which could be relative foster parents, and the birth family are promoted. They're working together towards the best outcome for the child. For full disclosure means everybody's talking about everything. Everybody hears and knows what's going on. You don't have a situation where a relative finds out at the 12-month mark. Wait, what? The parents not going to achieve reunification? The agency's filing for termination of parental rights? I'm not okay with that. The relatives at the table from the beginning, then they would know that, right? Like it wouldn't be a surprise. They would have had options to do something differently at the very beginning. And we're writing a case plan for court and selecting services to both address the needs to achieve reunification and to prepare an alternative caregiver to be the permanent caregiver for that child long term. So we're doing both things at the same time so that ultimately we can get to permanency faster, even if reunification ultimately is not the outcome. Okay, so now we're going to get to this little activity where I have people who are helping me so that we can kind of demonstrate how this works. We are going to be pretending that we're having a child and family team meeting for Chloe. So this is a case we talked about at the beginning, but we're going back to the beginning. We're not at the end after we've already missed our opportunity to do a better job. We're going back to the beginning and we're going to talk about what could we do now to make sure that we don't get to that situation that we talked about earlier. We're pretending that, Chloe came in from the hospital, came into foster care from the hospital. She's been in foster care for about 3 weeks. She is with a foster family. That's great. They're doing really good work. Everything, is going along fine. And we're getting ready to turn that first case plan in to court. So we have a meeting at this point to involve the parent in service planning. So what I want to do now is to have two of the members of the team introduce themselves and to share some of their thoughts about this upcoming meeting. So I'm going to ask Nikki, who's Chloe's mom, to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Chloe's mom, Nikki. I know I have a problem. I've tried to stop using before, but it just didn't stick. I want Chloe back. I want to be her mom. But I'm afraid that no one is going to give me a chance. I need help, and all DSS does is tell me what I need to do. Who is going to help me?
Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Allison, who is Chloe's foster care worker.
Hi, I'm Allison, Chloe's foster care worker. This is a sad situation. I know Nikki wants Chloe back, but Chloe is so young, and Nikki's drug use is just so risky. It's hard to see how Nikki will ever be able to care for Chloe. I want to help. I'm going to make sure that Nikki has access to services, but I'm not sure that that is going to be enough.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you just to reflect, like this is, I don't think either of these positions are unusual or unexpected at this point in the process, right? But imagine these two people sitting down together to make a service plan, which is going to be submitted to court for that first court hearing. Has anything happened at this point in our do-over that has made anything any different so that we won't get to that same bad outcome we got to last time, where we get to the 12-month mark and then the relatives come forward? Has anything changed at this point? I need to see some reactions, people. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Put something in the chat. Nope. Sarah Gilbert says, nope, nothing's changed. Right. This is business as usual. No, no, no. Exactly. This is business as usual, right? Like the worker is talking to mom. Mom is participating in meetings. We've got a plan that we've got to get to court. They're going to have a meeting and have a conversation about it. That's great. Like sometimes that doesn't happen. But, these are well-intended people who are doing what they're doing. But at this point, we haven't done anything any different to disrupt, what that end result might be, where neither reunification happens, nor do we get this child into a permanent family in a timely way without causing a whole bunch of trauma to a whole bunch of other people. Okay, so now we're going to actually start the child and family team meeting, and we're going to bring some other people to the table. Okay, so I'm going to have Lori, who's a substance use disorder treatment provider, introduce herself.
Hi, I am Lori. I am a substance use disorder treatment provider. We have services at my agency which should be really helpful to you, Nikki. We would really like to work with you. The next available intake appointment will be 2 weeks from today at noon. I hope to see you then.
Okay, and Megan, she's the foster mom.
I'm Megan. I'm Chloe's foster parent. I was able to take time off from work to help her when she first came to our family. She'll be old enough soon to start daycare, and we found a great place. So I'm feeling very positive about that. I also wanted to let folks know I'm very happy to take Chloe to visitation to the DSS office so she can have time with her mom. But I would also really appreciate that if Nikki isn't able to make the visitation for any reason, that folks let me know beforehand so that I don't have to load Chloe into the car and make the trip and then have her feel disappointed when she gets to the office.
Okay, and Allison is gonna talk to us a little bit about how the meeting went.
I'm Allison, the foster care worker, Nikki. We all really want to support you, but you have to get into treatment and come to visits with Chloe when they're scheduled. I understand that you had a job interview scheduled at the same time as the last visit, but if you're not going to be able to come for a visit, will you please call us and let us know? You told me that you needed help with transportation to be able to get to the substance abuse treatment agency, and I can give you bus passes before you leave today. How does that sound?
All right, so I want to suggest that again, this is a very typical child and family team meeting. The parents there, I mean, it's good. The parents there, we've got a service provider there, so mom can meet the service provider. We're talking about transportation. But have we changed anything? Has anything changed in terms of where we're going to end up 13 months from now when the relatives petition for custody? I'm seeing lots of no's on the things. Have we changed anything in terms of how Nikki feels about being supported by the agency? There's no additional, Anya says, no additional support for mom. I see some shaking heads. No, nothing has happened that's going to change the way mom is feeling. Have we done anything to change the way Allison is going to feel about this case? The worker? She going to feel any more positively that reunification is possible? Yeah, no. Okay, so now we're going to bring some additional people to the team meeting so that we can get a feel for how the dynamics change when we get other people to the table. So I would like to start by having Chloe's father introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Michael. Thanks for making arrangements for me to join by phone. Even though I'm in jail and I can't do much to help, I want Chloe to be with Nikki. I thought that that'd be okay when I went away. If Chloe can't be with Nikki right now, why can't my grandma take care of her until Nikki is ready?
Okay, and Michael's grandma, Gail, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Gail, Michael's grandmother. I've been taking care of Michael most of his life. I wish I could take care of Chloe, but I'm taking care of 3 other children, Michael's cousin's kids. I work and those kids need a lot right now. I just don't feel like I can manage a baby too, but I want to see Chloe and have a relationship with her. Can visits be set up for me too?
And Aaron, Michael's brother and Chloe's uncle.
Hi, I'm Aaron, Michael's brother. Super glad to be here today. I knew Chloe was in foster care, but I really understand what that meant. I thought Nikki was getting her back. I knew Michael wasn't in a situation where he could do much, but everything he said made it sound like things were doing good. Now I'm not sure. It seems like Nikki has to do a lot of things that are going to be kind of hard for her. I also hear DSS saying that if Nikki can't do those things, Chloe will be put up for adoption. I'm not okay with that. I don't want to take Chloe away from Nikki, but maybe she could be with me and my wife while Nikki gets things figured out. Is that possible? I want to know more about the options, what the options are.
Right. And Shayna, Nikki's aunt.
Hi, I'm Shayna, Nikki's aunt. I'm here for Nikki. She had it rough and she's really trying hard. If visits with Chloe can be scheduled for the morning or on weekends, I can drive Nikki to the visits. I know she wants to see Chloe as often as she can, and I want to help make that happen. I can also help Nikki get her treatment appointments. I just need to be involved in the scheduling so that I can fit them in when I'm not working.
Great, thanks. Okay, so now have we done something different? Have we done something to interrupt sort of the business as usual to make sure that we have a better chance? We can't control everything, but we have a better chance of not getting to the 13-month mark and having relatives come forward and petition for custody at that time. So I see a lot of yes. How do we think mom might be feeling now with these additional people at the table? More supported. You can read it, Brenda.
Hopeful, encouraged, hopeful, not so alone. A lot of hopefuls here.
And how as the worker might Allison be feeling at this point?
Relieved, supported, a light at the end of the tunnel or timeline.
Your timeline. Yeah, I mean, I think it's both a little bit overwhelming. Like I heard grandma say, can I have visits? And, Uncle Aaron wants to know how to get approved to be a foster family. Like there's some work that's coming out of this, but also there are additional resources that have been identified. There's a team of people who at this point are saying they want to be a support to this family and child. And there are more options than there were by a long shot, in terms of either getting to reunification or a plan B. I mean, what I particularly like is I heard the aunt and the uncle, the aunt isn't at this meeting, but the uncle say that he wants this kid to be with her parents, but in the meantime, he wants to do what he can to take care of her. Even though he's paternal family, he's supportive of Nikki. And that, like, granted, I wrote this script, so I made it as supportive as possible, but it is possible for these things to happen, right? Families do this for each other, which is why we wanted to kind of demonstrate that in this activity. All right, so we have one more script. We're going to have the foster care worker kind of sum up the meeting and talk about next steps so you get a feel of how that goes. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about concurrent planning in general. Allison.
So, Nikki, what do you think about the things that we have talked about so far? I want to make sure that whatever we have put into place is going to be helpful to you.
You can read the next part too. I'm just saying that would happen.
Okay. Do you want me to read Aaron's piece?
Yes. No, that's you're talking to Aaron.
Okay. Aaron, I'd like to spend some additional time with you today talking about the next steps for you and your wife to potentially be approved as foster parents. If you're okay with it, we can start the background check process today, and I can answer any questions you have. We can also schedule a meeting for later in the day when your wife would be able to join us. As we wrap up, let's go ahead and schedule the meeting for next month. But before we do that, is there anyone else who we should invite to the next meeting? Who else might be a good resource to support Nikki and Chloe as we move forward?
Thank you, Liz, for reading. So that's just to give you a taste of like how you at the end of a child and family team meeting, or if it's an FPM, you do this in FPM too, but you identify kind of what the next steps are, and then you invite everybody to come back again. Like ideally you'd set the date so everybody would know in advance, and then you wouldn't have to try to schedule with all those people to get them to come to the next meeting. They would know already. And by doing that, you're making a commitment that the parent can feel, right? All those people are there for her and they're committing to coming back again. And also a commitment, you're making a commitment to them and to the parent to continue to work transparently, to continue to involve them in decision making, make sure that they know what's going on, and that you're going to be actively supporting them to be involved in a way that gives Nikki the best chance of achieving reunification, but also supports their connection with Chloe, who's their family. Okay, so we're going to talk about, these are the last three, there's 6 steps overall for concurrent planning. We're going to circle back around and talk about these last 3. But what I want to emphasize is this part, that when children are placed with relative foster families, we have a built-in plan B. right? Like right there, plan B, that allows the family and extended family to be aware of and involved in decision-making from the very beginning, because they're the foster family, they're at the table, they're in court, they're reading the service plan. Progress and lack of progress is going to be reviewed. The extended family members are also an important resource, because when we place children with family that they know, it reduces the impact of the trauma of the removal. Relatives are more likely to support frequent visitation with birth parent. In this case, we had a different relative who was willing to support with transportation. You had a lot of resources at the table who maybe could supervise visits at some point in the future. Like these relatives might, the aunt and uncle maybe could supervise visits with Nikki and Michael when he gets out of jail. Like that might be an option. That grandma might be an option. She wants to have visits. Shayna, the mom's aunt, might be an option to supervise visits at some point in the future. But in the meantime, they may be able to coordinate with each other in order to schedule visitation and to support frequent visitation, more frequent visitation than any worker would be able to do completely on their own, if you think about all the transportation and coordination. And then relatives can support the parents with the efforts to achieve reunification. Like we have foster families that are really good at supporting parents to achieve reunification. But in this case, like because mom was struggling, the longer time went on, this foster family, as makes perfect sense, got invested in the idea of adopting her. It's really challenging to ask a family who's fallen in love with a child and considers that child their own, then to turn around and support a different permanency plan. Somebody said in the chat, the foster family should always be prepared for a relative to come forward. Of course they should be, but it's asking a heck of a lot for them to be able to then emotionally invest in supporting an alternative permanency plan. If we can place a child with relatives who are already invested in having a relationship with a birth parent or an extended family member, asking them to support an alternative permanency plan looks very, very different than when we ask foster parents to do that. Okay, so step 4 for concurrent planning is addressing service needs. I put assistance with concrete needs up there at the top. Like we talked about transportation, housing, like the barriers these parents have to jump to get through to be able to achieve reunification. We need to make those priorities, particularly with substance abuse issues, substance use disorder issues. Getting into treatment services immediately is critical. Like the time it takes to work through a treatment program, and we know there are wait lists everywhere. It like sending a parent to the community service board and hoping that they'll come up with a service provider there is really not an effective way of ensuring that they're going to be engaged in services around substance use. Like there might be services at the CSB, but the family might need support to negotiate that system and to access those services sooner rather than later. I do think the work that we've done by bringing other supports to the table increases the likelihood that Nikki will ask for help if she needs help in negotiating that system. We do want to think about parent and relative visitation. We want to look at training for relatives who are interested in becoming foster parent that's specific to being a relative foster parent. We want to look at attachment assessments, attachment services, and we want to think about trauma that the parents have experienced, trauma that relatives may have experienced, trauma that the child's experienced, and make sure that we're putting appropriate trauma services in place to address that. And then I put family therapy on the list because work between extended family and the parents may be an important part of a long-term permanency plan for the child. If the child's not a baby, you might have a middle grader or teenager that you're working with. Work between the child and their parents may be really important. So those are all the kinds of things we want to be thinking about, not just in terms of what the child needs and the parent needs, but the triad. We want to think about the child, the parent, and the relative or other caregiver, which might be a foster parent, but ideally would be a relative foster parent or a relative who could potentially take custody. Though, like you want to make sure you're looking at all three parts of the triad and putting services in place in order to get to a permanency outcome for the kid. And then this is the piece we just were talking about, placement with a family that can meet the child's long-term needs. When we're talking about adoption, one of the things, that concurrent planning really emphasizes is that you don't wait until you file for TPR and you're moving towards adoption to then assess whether the family the child is placed with is the adoptive family. Like you want to do that assessment earlier. Again, if the child's placed with relatives, then you have a whole bunch of other options. Like you potentially can do KingGap or or adoption. But if you have a child placed with a foster family that isn't planning to adopt, like thinking about how to get this child to the alternative caregiver who is going to be a permanent family for them in the future sooner rather than later is really important. And again, it's another, if you have a child in a foster family and you're getting to the point of thinking about TPR, that's another time to do relative search and engagement. Like if you haven't done it, like if you've done it, but it hasn't resulted in family members coming forward, or the team not being quite as robust as the team in our example, like that's another time to bring that work to the forefront and build a team to support that child. We want to make sure that kids don't disrupt in their foster home placements, regardless of what the permanency plan is, because more disruptions pile on trauma. Like think about the kids that I was talking about on our high acuity safe and sound task force list, kids who've had 18 to 25 placements. More disruptions pile on trauma. Congregate care placements pile on trauma. The more trauma a child experiences, the less likely reunification will be successful or transition to any caregiver will be successful. So whatever we can do to minimize placement disruptions by supporting foster families, by exploring relatives, approving relatives as foster families, and then supporting relatives so that they're successful as a foster family, all of those things make a difference whether ultimately we achieve reunification or an alternative permanency goal. Like, the work to prevent disruption, school changes, all the things that go along with disruption is really important to the overall trajectory of the case in terms of achieving permanency or reunification. And then I want to talk just briefly about the sixth step, which is voluntary relinquishment. Like often we talk about the importance of the birth parent or the parent having a relationship with the foster parent, because when that relationship is good, parents will sometimes sign permanent entrustment so that their children can be adopted by that parent. That is especially true if the foster family is also a relative. Like the parents typically want to know that they're going to be able to have ongoing connections with their child. They want to know that they'll be able to see the child, hear about the child, know about how the child's doing, maybe be a part of that child's life in some way in the future. Again, that's a pretty significant challenge for most of our foster parents to agree to. We have some people out there that just have the biggest hearts and are willing to take on the kid and their family. But when the foster family is a relative foster family, they already have a relationship with the parent, that work of having a healthy relationship that doesn't involve the parent being the primary caretaker of the child is something that they can do together. Like they can talk about what is the parent's role going to be with that child in the future. And maybe that parent will be a support to the relative as that child grows up. You know, they'll have an unusual co-parenting kind of relationship, or extended family support kind of relationship. But one of the advantages of those close relationships is that then the parent may sign a permanent entrustment so the relative can adopt, and we don't have to go through the very hard process of terminating parental rights, and really making those relationships even more strained, right? So this last step we primarily talk about in terms of foster parent adoption, but I really want to emphasize that if the child can be placed with a relative and we get to the point that reunification is not possible, that exploring kin gap or a voluntary relinquishment so that the relative can adopt is still something that the team, you know, could work on. It might be easier to accomplish with a relative foster family. All right, so that was my last slide. I'm going to take my presentation down, and I am going to open the door for conversation to get your reactions.
Yes, please feel free to unmute. We have a nice sized group here, so you don't have to use the chat. Feel free to unmute and let's have that conversation.
Thoughts, reactions?
This is Errol. I'm gonna say that this was a little helpful because, to be honest, I have a case just like this. It has not reached the 12-month mark, but it shows where more support could be built using more family members and stuff like that. So definitely, I will be going back to the drawing board to use some of these techniques.
Wonderful. Does anybody have any questions or a case example that they want to talk about?
I actually had a question, Em. I was wondering, so how would you recommend implementing this into cases that are already pretty deep in? Like a lot has happened, there's a lot of history. Because ideally, obviously, you would want to start this off, or at least, characteristics of concurrent planning with every case. But when you're already really deep in, or if it's just gotten really far ahead of you, how do you kind of get started, would you say?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think you'd start by scheduling a meeting and just bringing as many people to the table as possible. I think one of the things about our work with families is that, there's no case that's exactly like another case, and we are always learning and developing that's part of the work that we do. And so I think it's always okay to say to a family, I'd like to try something new. Like I'm not feeling confident that things are going the way you want them to go or I want them to go. I'm not feeling confident that we're going to get to a good outcome in a timely way if we just keep doing what we've been doing. Mom, Dad, would you be open to trying something new? Like, this is what I want to try. I think you could do that. I think you could just say, we have a court date coming up. I'm obliged to explore all the options for this child. And so I want to make sure we have all the options on the table. Let's Let's pull together a bigger group than we normally have when we're meeting and make sure that we have all the options on the table. Who mom or dad do you want to have at the table? Who would be helpful to you? Who should we be talking to that we haven't been talking to? Who are your supports? Who are this kid's supports? In the family seeing work that we've been doing with Kevin Campbell, he's got a list of questions to ask, like, who loves this kid? Those are the people that we need to have at the table. Who does this kid love? Who's important to the kid? And we can ask, when, depending on the age of the child, you can definitely ask the child, who needs to be involved in coming up with a plan for you? Like what needs, at this point, who else can we bring to the table? Who else needs to be involved? Who could be a resource? Who could be somebody who could love this kid in the future? We need them to be involved in service planning, case permanency planning for this kid. Those are the people who are going to have different ideas and be willing to do the work that it's going to take to open up options for the family.
Thank you, Em. That perfectly answered my question. And I think it really brings up the dichotomy we sometimes have of like, oh, I need to be the person to kind of do all these things, be the, kind of common thread between a couple people, but really adding more, even though it could be more difficult at times, or just a different way to work could be really helpful and just a lot more affirmative and supportive for everybody involved.
Yeah, Gwen, I think I love the idea of not having to have all the answers. These cases are hard. My goodness, they're hard. I love the idea of being a partner with the family, and that's the parent, but the extended family too. And letting the family tell me, we say it's part of our practice model, the family's the expert on themselves. They know things I don't know. If I can get them in a room and talking to me about what the options are, about what they need, about how can we as the agency best help this family make a plan for this child, suddenly I have a whole bunch more people to help. It's not all on me at that point. The family's involved in making the plan. And there are other people to help do the work. And most importantly, if the parent can feel supported in a different way, like that's what we were talking about, in the example with Nikki, when we had those other people around the table saying they wanted to support her, it makes it easier for me to support her too. It means that what I have to offer is more likely to be received in a way that is going to move the long-term outcome, for the case. Other thoughts? Sarah, we can't do everything. That's absolutely right. And we don't know everything, for Pete's sakes. I do have another case. It's actually a very different, case. I'm gonna go ahead and share it. And then we're not going to do like the whole exercise thing, but I just want to sort of to Gwen's point, if we could talk about here we go. If we could talk about where would we start with this case. So this child is more like our high acuity kids, our safe and sound kids. Jason came into care at age 7, had experienced significant physical abuse in his family. He was separated from his younger siblings. Eventually, the agency pursued TPR, but he's had 3 foster/adoptive family disruptions. He's 12 and he's living in a group home. Again, this is not unusual. Like, this happens. These are the cases that we're seeing in the field. He's also had 3 foster care workers in the last year, and he's not had a visitor in the group home other than a worker, or an off-ground pass with anyone in more than 12 months. So what are we thinking about getting to permanency for this kid? Like, what's the likelihood that we're gonna, have a good outcome in this case. Slim, not good, very difficult. No, this is a super hard case, especially at this point, right? Like all these things have happened and now we're here. This kid has experienced so much trauma, so much trauma. And we hope he's got a good therapist who's working with him on some of this stuff. But you know what he doesn't have? He doesn't have family. He doesn't have a connection to anyone who is really going to help with healing. We've got him with a roof over his head. Hopefully, he's not experiencing abuse in that setting, but we can't even guarantee that for sure anywhere, right? We can't guarantee that he's not going to be exposed to other kinds of bad behaviors in that setting or have school failure or all the other kinds of stuff that happen to our kids that lead then to more time in congregate care placements, not less time. So what could we do? Like, what can we do at this point to change the trajectory?
So Amanda put in the chat, diligent search to try and find additional family.
Yeah, so one of the things that's interesting is that we have TPR in this case. So what do people think about that? Who are we searching? I know people know the answer to this question. I'm waiting for somebody to put it in the chat. All right, Chastity. Yes. So there could be people that he's been connected to since he's been in foster care. Somebody in a provider situation, somebody from school, a coach, somebody he knows in some way. That could be an avenue. But also we can search for biofamily too. We can, for older kids, look at reunification, even with a parent that we achieve TPR with. Like the child has to be older, but we can work on reunification because this kid's been in care for 5 years. His parent situations could be very different now than they were when he first came into care. And you know what? We haven't offered him anything better than what we took, he's not being abused. He's safe. I don't want it to sound exactly that way, but really we have an obligation to do more than just provide him with a place to live and a roof over his head. We have not given him an opportunity to heal and to grow into that productive adult who's going to be a better parent than his parents were. That is not happening in this case right now. So we can look at other things. We can look at the birth parents. I'm trying not to say birth parents, but it gets confusing if I just say too many random words. Parents, we can look at the parents and we can look at the extended family. If we have information about the family in the foster care record, we can reach out to people. And we can revisit those questions. I think that because this kid is potentially fragile, but he's been through a lot already. We might want to do some of the work with the extended family without him being at the table. But the piece that Chastity was saying about fictive kin, like we can ask him, who do you love? Who is important to you? If you could be connected, just if someone could come and visit you, who would you want that to be? And that can be a starting place. If nothing else, someone needs to start visiting this kid. Like we need to figure that out. Somebody who they care about needs to start visiting this kid and taking them off campus. They need to know that somebody cares about them. Somebody's going to call them on their freaking birthday and wish them happy birthday. Somebody's going to come with a cake on their birthday and spend the day with them. Like we owe it to that kid to make that happen. And it can't just be the worker. This is the good news, bad news, right? We're really important in the lives of our clients. And many clients feel like their relationship with their worker, kid or parent, has been super important to their success. But this kid's been in care 5 years. How many workers do you think they've had? like we're temporary. The service providers are temporary. The group home staff are temporary. We're the system, any of the paid supports, no matter how well-intentioned they are or how fabulous they are temporary in this kid's life. And he needs something permanent. He needs somebody who's going to be there for him until he's 50, not just next month. So this is an example of a case where we certainly are going down a road that's not going to lead us to any of those outcomes that we said we wanted at the very beginning of this presentation. But we have a chance to do something different, even at this point. We just have to think about what it would take and get out of the habit of sort of business as usual, which is where we have I don't know, we're already well past our time frame for permanency and the kid's safe and stable. I often think that like safe and stable is the worst thing that could happen to a kid because then we get distracted by other cases, by other things on our caseload that are, more emergent. This kid could just stay in this group home until he turns 18. But that would not be good for him or the kinds of outcomes that we want or lead to his being better prepared to parent and have a different kind of life, in the future. Right. Placement stability is not permanency. So thoughts, reactions?
I just want to note this just because this is recorded and people who are watching the recording will not get to read the chat. But Amanda had put a comment in there about that they had recently placed a child who had TPR with his biological family. It is possible with a lot of work and that family circumstances can change. So I just really want to make sure that, whoever watches this recording can see that that is a possibility. So thank you, Amanda, for putting that in the chat.
All right. Well, I don't have anything further. I will stay for the whole next 5 minutes if people have questions or cases they want to talk about or any reaction to the presentation. But we are near the end of our time. I'm really glad that all these folks came. I always like to talk about this stuff. And really it's nice to be with people who are committed to doing good work for the kids and families that we serve. So I appreciate you all. Happy Reunification Month. And thank you so much for all the work that you're doing every day to support kids and families.
Thank you all.